My name is Carrie. This happened about 4 years ago when I was working the overnight shift at a gas station off I-40 in rural New Mexico. I want to preface this by saying I am not a person who scares easily. I grew up in a big family in a small house, which means I spent a lot of time alone just to get some peace and quiet. Solitude has never bothered me. Night shifts have never bothered me. But this did. I had been working that particular station for about 8 months at that point. The overnight was actually my preferred shift. It paid a little more and I was in school during the day, so the hours worked out. The station was a small one. 2 sets of pumps outside, a single-room convenience store, a storage room in the back, and a bathroom that was technically labeled for customers but that I used more than anyone. Most nights I'd get a handful of truckers between midnight and about 3 a.m., and then it would go completely dead until sunrise. I had my routine down. I knew the regulars by name. I knew what to expect and when to expect it. The night it happened was a Tuesday in late October. I remember the date specifically because it was my boyfriend's birthday and I had called him on my break, which I know is a weird detail to remember, but it's the kind of thing that sticks. It was a slow night even by overnight standards. By 2 a.m., I hadn't seen a single customer in almost an hour. I was restocking the cooler in the back when I heard the door chime go off, which is the electronic sound that plays whenever the front door opens. I called out that I'd be right there, finished what I was doing, and walked out front. There was no one there. I looked around the store. I checked both ends of the aisles. I even looked out through the front windows at the pumps. Nothing. There were no cars outside. I told myself the sensor had just misfired, which does happen occasionally. I went back to what I was doing. About 10 minutes later, the chime went off again. This time I walked out immediately. Again, the store was empty. I stood there for a second, actually annoyed more than anything. I figured the sensor was acting up and made a mental note to tell my manager in the morning. I walked to the front door and opened it to look outside, half expecting to see some kid messing around. But the lot was completely empty. The pumps were dark. The road out front was dead. I stood there for a second and let the night air in, and that's when I noticed that the exterior light over pump 2 was out. That bulb had been fine all night. I had done my lot check at midnight and everything had been working. I stared at that dark patch around pump 2 for a moment and then went back inside. It wasn't until I was back behind the counter that I realized I didn't feel right about something. I stood there trying to figure out what was nagging at me. And then I got it. When I had opened the front door to look outside, the sensor hadn't chimed. But the sensor chimes for every door open and close without exception. I had opened the door and heard nothing. I tested it again right then. I pushed the door open. Chime. I let it close. The sensor was working fine, which meant that whatever had triggered it the first 2 times wasn't the front door opening and closing. It was something else. I started thinking about the layout of the store and what else could trigger the sensor. The answer was nothing. It was keyed specifically to the front door. I know because I had asked my manager about it once before when it misfired during a storm. She told me the only thing that sets it off is the magnetic contact on the door frame. I was still standing there processing this when I heard a sound from the storage room in the back. It was a soft but distinct thud. Not a crash. Not something falling off a shelf. Just a single, low thud, like something being set down. I want to be honest and say that for a moment, I genuinely considered going back there to check. The storage room wasn't large and there was only one way in or out. But I didn't. Instead, I picked up the phone behind the counter and called my manager. She didn't pick up. I called her again. Still nothing. I was debating whether it was worth calling 911 over a sound I couldn't explain when the storage room door, which I had left propped open when I was restocking, slowly swung shut on its own. There was no draft in that building. I had worked there 8 months and the air was always stale and completely still. The door had never once moved on its own. I was out from behind the counter and through the front door in under 5 seconds. I didn't grab my jacket. I didn't grab my bag. I walked as fast as I could to the far end of the lot, put my back against the fence, and called 911. 2 officers showed up maybe 15 minutes later. They searched the building, including the storage room. They found the back door, which was a fire exit that was supposed to be alarmed, wide open. The alarm had been disabled. The officers couldn't tell me when it had been opened or how long it had been that way. They walked the perimeter outside, checked behind the building, and found nothing. One of them asked me if I had propped the back door open myself. I told him no. He wrote something down and didn't say much after that. Nothing was stolen. Nobody was caught. The security footage from inside the store showed nothing in the aisles or near the counter. The exterior camera covering the back of the building had been on a loop. I only found that out later when my manager reviewed the footage and realized it had been replaying the same 4 minutes of empty parking lot on a loop for almost 2 hours. Someone had accessed the system and set it up that way before I even arrived for my shift. I quit 3 days later and I have never worked a night shift since. This is something I haven't really talked about in detail until now. My name is Derek. I'm in my mid-40s. I was around 30 when this happened, so this goes back about 15 years or so. I travel a lot for work, always have, mostly long drives between mid-sized cities. I've logged more highway miles than I can reasonably estimate, and I've stopped at more gas stations than I can count. This is the one I still think about. It was late, probably close to midnight, somewhere in rural Mississippi on a 2-lane state road. I had missed the interstate exit I was supposed to take, and rather than backtracking, I just decided to continue south and find an alternate route. This was before I used my phone for navigation the way everyone does now, and I had a paper atlas in the passenger seat that I kept referencing. At some point I realized I was genuinely lost and running low on fuel, which is when I spotted the gas station on the side of the road. It was a small station, older looking, the kind with a single pump island and an attached garage bay that looked like it hadn't been used in years. The lights were on though, which I was relieved to see. I pulled in and got out to pump gas. The place felt empty. I looked through the front window into the store and could see the interior lit up, but couldn't make out anyone behind the counter from where I was standing. I figured the attendant was in the back somewhere and didn't think much of it. I finished pumping gas and went inside to pay. There was a man behind the counter. He was older, probably late 60s, and when I walked in, he was staring at the door. Not at me specifically. At the door. Like he was watching for someone. I said good evening and told him the pump number, and he took my cash without saying a word. Not unusual on its own. Some people aren't talkers. I pocketed my change and was turning to leave when he spoke. He said, "Don't go out the front." I stopped. I asked him what he'd said and he repeated it in the same flat, quiet voice. "Don't go out the front." His eyes were still on the door and not on me. I'm not someone who panics, but I felt something shift in me right then. I asked him why, and he didn't answer. He just moved his eyes slowly to the right, in the direction of the garage bay on the side of the building. Whether that was an instruction or just a nervous habit, I couldn't tell. I stood there for a second trying to decide what to do with the information. My car was right outside. I had parked maybe 20 feet from the front door. Everything looked normal out there. I asked him again why I shouldn't use the front door, and this time he looked directly at me for the first time since I had walked in. He looked exhausted. He looked like a man who had been awake for a very long time. He said, "Just wait a few minutes." Then he looked back at the door. I stood at the counter for I don't know how long. 3 minutes maybe. Neither of us said anything. And then a car pulled into the lot. It was a dark sedan, no plates that I could see from where I was standing, and it parked sideways across the front of the station instead of at the pump. Just stopped at an angle in the middle of the lot. The engine stayed running. I watched through the window. No one got out. The man behind the counter had gone completely still. We both watched the car for what felt like a very long time. It just sat there with its lights on and the engine running. I remember being aware of how quiet it was. No radio in the station. No hum of a cooler. Just the muffled sound of that car's engine outside. Then, without any warning, the car reversed out of the lot and drove away. The old man behind the counter exhaled slowly. He told me I could leave now. I asked him what that was, and he said he didn't know, which I did not believe for even a second. I walked out to my car, and I will admit that I went out the side door near the garage bay and not the front. I drove away fast and I stayed on that state road until I hit a town with a motel and I stopped for the night. I've gone back and forth on what that was for 15 years. What I keep coming back to is the fact that he knew. He saw me walk in and immediately told me not to go out the front. That means he had already been watching that lot before I arrived. Something had already happened, or was already developing, and I had walked into the middle of it. I think about the fact that if I had just walked back out to my car the normal way, I would have been standing outside at a pump when that car pulled in. I don't know what that would have meant. I don't know and I don't want to know, but I've never stopped wondering. I'm going to keep my name out of this one. I'll just say I'm a woman in my early 30s and this happened about 3 years ago on a road trip I was taking by myself from Portland down to visit a friend in the Bay Area. I've driven that stretch of I-5 several times. It's long and boring and certain sections of it feel genuinely remote, especially once you get into the valley. I didn't think anything of it. I had done solo road trips before and I'm pretty self-sufficient. I had my phone. I had a full tank to start, and I had a loose plan. I stopped for gas somewhere in the middle of the Central Valley. It was a bright, modern station, well lit, attached to a fast food place on one side. There were a few other cars at the pumps when I pulled in. Nothing felt off. I got out and started pumping and I noticed a man at the pump directly across from me. He was maybe 40, average build, nothing remarkable. He was filling up an older white pickup. I noticed him only because he was looking at me, and when I noticed, he looked away. I thought nothing of it. I went inside to grab a drink and used the restroom. When I came back out to my car, my pump had stopped, which meant the tank was full. I put the nozzle back and got into my car. Before I pulled out, I glanced in my mirrors out of habit. The white pickup was still at its pump. The man was standing outside of it now, but he wasn't pumping gas. He was on his phone, but facing my car. I noted it and pulled out. I got back on the highway and within a few minutes I was thinking about something else entirely. About 30 miles down the road, I stopped at a rest area. I needed to stretch my legs. I parked, got out, walked around a little, and got back in. And that's when I noticed the white pickup parked at the far end of the rest area lot. Same truck. I recognized the slight rust on the lower passenger door. He was sitting inside with the engine on. I told myself I was being paranoid. It was a highway. People travel the same roads. He could be going to the same general area I was. I pulled out and got back on the freeway. This time I paid attention to my mirrors. About a mile past the rest area, I saw headlights enter the freeway from the on-ramp. I couldn't tell the vehicle. I drove for another 20 miles or so and made a point to slow down a little below the speed limit and let some cars pass me. Most of them did. One set of headlights stayed back at a consistent distance. It was impossible to tell the make of the vehicle in the dark. I called my friend who I was driving to see. I told her what had happened and what I thought I was seeing. She told me to stop somewhere busy. Not a gas station, somewhere with people and light and cameras. I got off at the next exit. It was a mid-sized truck stop, very bright, lots of semis, a diner attached. I pulled into a spot near the diner entrance and sat in my car with the engine running and watched the exit ramp. A few cars came off after me. One of them was a white pickup. It pulled into the lot and parked about 6 rows away from me. I walked directly into the diner and sat in a booth near the window that faced the lot. The man from the pump got out of the truck. He wasn't looking at me. He was on his phone again. He stood outside his truck for a few minutes and then got back in. I sat in that diner for over an hour. I ordered coffee I didn't want and food I barely touched. My friend stayed on the phone with me for most of it. When I finally looked back out at the lot, the white pickup was gone. I waited another 20 minutes after that before I left. I didn't see the truck again for the rest of the drive and I made it to my friend's place fine. And I want to be clear that I never actually confirmed what his intentions were, if he had any. It's entirely possible he was just a person who happened to be heading south on the same highway. I know that, but I also know the feeling that was in my stomach from the rest stop to that diner, and that feeling was not paranoia. That feeling was my brain telling me that something was wrong, and I believe that's a feeling worth listening to. I haven't done a solo road trip since and I'm genuinely not sure if I will again. What I do know is that I will never let my tank get below half. I will never stop somewhere isolated, and I will never, under any circumstances, dismiss that feeling again.